Forget New Year, New You. This season is about slowing down, locking the doors, and cozying up at home with the one you really want to do nothing with. Your dog. After the holiday chaos, those quiet nights with a blanket, a podcast, and your pup feel like the reset you actually need. Ollie helps make those moments easier with fresh protein-packed meals made from real human-grade ingredients, so your dog can enjoy some quality comfort food too. Choose from 5 recipes and get a personalized plan for your dog's needs. Meals arrive perfectly proportioned with a scoop and storage container, so serving is fast and mess-free. And with Ollie's in-app on-demand health screenings, supporting your dog is easy, ensuring more cuddles for many years to come. Visit ollie.com/truecrime and use code TRUECRIME for 60% off your first box.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
The victim in today's case, whom we'll call Emily Doe, wrote a victim impact statement that, shortly after reading it out loud in a courtroom in Santa Clara, California, went viral after BuzzFeed printed it on their website. It read, in part, "You have dragged me through this hell with you, dipped me back into that night again and again. You knocked down both of our towers. I collapsed at the same time you did. Your damage was concrete, stripped of titles, degrees, enrollments. My damage was internal, unseen. I carry it with me. You took away my worth, my privacy, my energy, my time, my safety, my intimacy, my confidence, my own voice, until today." It had been about a year and a half, on January 18th, 2015 to be exact, since the call of an unconscious female came into the Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office in Palo Alto, California. A little after 1 a.m., Deputies Adams and Taylor responded to 664 Lomita Court, housing that belonged to the Kappa Alpha fraternity on the Stanford University campus. When they got to the side of the house, they saw a woman, who would later come to be known as 22-year-old Emily Doe, lying on her left side in the fetal position, behind a dumpster, under a pine tree. She was wearing a black dress, which was pulled up to her waist, her underwear in a wad on the ground, about 6 inches away from her. The top of her dress was stretched down over both of her shoulders, exposing her bra, and there was a light gray sweatshirt, part of which was still hanging off of her left arm, while the rest of it was bunched up in front of her on the ground. She was wearing a necklace, whose pendant would normally hang down the front of her neck, but was now centered on her back. Her hair was disheveled and knotted, and both her hair and her dress were covered in pine needles. She was breathing, but was unresponsive. Paramedics arrived and tried several techniques to wake her, but were not successful. She vomited, but would not regain consciousness. Emily was transported by ambulance to the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. The paramedics had determined that she was severely intoxicated. Deputy Taylor continued to try and wake her in the ambulance so he could ask her questions about how she had gotten there and why she had been lying on the ground like that, but no luck. And when she did wake up, about 3 hours later, she had no memory of what happened to her. While the deputies had been tending to Emily, a man had approached them. He told them that he had someone pinned down over there and pointed to an area about 50 yards away. Deputy Adams asked who he was referring to, and the man responded that it was the guy who did that and pointed to Emily, who was still unconscious on the ground. Deputy Adams radioed for additional units, and then he and Deputy Taylor ran over to where the man had pointed. There, they saw 2 men restraining a third man on the ground. They detained the man on the ground, who they later identified as Brock Turner, and put him in the back of their squad car while they interviewed the other men. Peter Johnson and Carl Arndt were graduate students. They said they had been riding their bikes when a movement caught their eye. They saw a woman lying on her back with a man on top of her. It looked like they were having sex, a mutual interaction, Peter said he thought at first. But still, he felt like something weird was going on. As he rode his bike closer, he noticed that the woman wasn't moving, and that's when he was sure that something was terribly wrong. He told Carl that they needed to check it out and make sure everything was okay. So they got off their bikes, and Peter yelled out, "Hey!" The man looked up, slowly got up off the female, and then started running away. Seeing that the woman was unconscious, Peter took off running after the man. He yelled at him to stop several times, but the man continued to run. Peter caught up to him and tackled him to the ground. As Peter was talking to Deputy Adams, he broke down into tears several times, saying that what he had seen was very disturbing to him. Emily's victim impact statement, parts of which I read at the beginning of this episode, was indeed powerful and well written. But that wasn't the only thing that pushed this case into the spotlight. It was the news about who the accused perpetrator was, and more importantly, the punishment that followed, that really ended up grabbing national headlines. This is Jillian, and you are listening to Court Junkie, episode 58. On January 27, 2015, 19-year-old Brock Allen Turner was charged with the rape. Brock was a freshman at Stanford University and was already slated to be a star on their swim team, which at the time was ranked 10th in the nation. Before being recruited to Stanford, Brock was on the Oakwood High School swim team, having twice won the state championships, and he also raced in the 2012 U.S. Olympic trials. But despite the many accolades he may have enjoyed prior to January 18, 2015, he was now an accused rapist. After news of his arrest made the rounds, Brock voluntarily withdrew from Stanford, and the university said he was no longer allowed on campus. They were banning him. A rather surprising move for a campus that, perhaps unbeknownst to the general public, had a lot of issues with sexual assaults on campus in the past. In fact, up until 2011, Stanford used the beyond a reasonable doubt standard, which is the standard in criminal cases, to adjudicate disciplinary cases involving sexual assault or harassment. Using this standard was unusual. It was only in use by a couple schools, Stanford being one of them.
Stanford had a number of other really regressive policies in place, such as it allowed the involved students to directly cross-examine each other, meaning that an alleged rape victim would be directly questioned by the alleged perpetrator in front of a large panel that included many students. There would be many staff members in the room. I mean, it was a very public setting, essentially a free-for-all in which the alleged rapist could question the alleged victim.
Michelle Dauber, a law professor at Stanford, had long been advocating for change to Stanford's policies. She first started noticing that there was a problem when she was an assistant professor. Students used to come to her, telling her that they had been sexually assaulted. She would send them to the office that handled that, thinking that they would be in good hands, and they would come back and tell her that there's no way they felt comfortable reporting it. In fact, from 1996 to 2009, there were only 175 reports of sexual violence on campus, with only 4 disciplinary hearings and only 2 findings of responsibility. Professor Dauber led a process in 2011 that revised the rules. She chaired a committee that made some significant reforms. They eliminated the sort of public cross-examinations where the victim and the perpetrator had to be in the same room at the same time. Instead, they could now submit questions for each other through a mutual party. But those reforms were eventually reversed, and in 2015, when Brock was arrested, Stanford still had its problems.
So in Stanford's last climate survey, which was done in 2015, only 2.7% of those students who reported that they had experienced some form of sexual violence reported it to anyone at the university. And that's, a third of what other schools are getting for reporting. Now, we're going to do another climate survey this spring. Maybe the number will have gone up, but that's what it was at the last survey. And that is really an artifact of these extremely victim-unfriendly policies that I'm describing.
This case with Brock and Emily, however, was a little different. There were witnesses, and Emily was found unconscious on campus grounds. Reports stated that Brock had met Emily at a campus party and had sexually assaulted her while she was passed out, unconscious. He was being charged with 5 felonies in all: 1 count of raping an unconscious person, 1 count of raping an intoxicated person, 2 counts of sexual penetration with a foreign object, and 1 count of assault while attempting to commit rape. If convicted of the crimes, he would be facing up to 14 years in prison. After Brock's arrest, he was released on $150,000 bail. According to police reports, Brock told investigators that he had hooked up with Emily after drinking 7 cans of beer and a couple swigs of whiskey, but he said that it wasn't rape. He said he had met Emily that night at a Kappa Alpha party and that the two ended up kissing on the ground outside the house. He said he took off her underwear, penetrated her with his fingers, and touched her breasts. But he said he never took off his pants. He said he started to feel unwell, so he got up and was suddenly tackled by a group of guys. He said he never ran away from them. Brock told investigators that Emily had rubbed his back and seemed to be enjoying herself, and that his intentions were not to try and rape the girl without her consent, but to instead hook up with the girl. Emily also gave a statement to police. She said she went to the party with her sister and was getting drunk and having fun when at 11:45 p.m. she poured herself 2 vodka shots. At about midnight, she and her sister went to the back of the house and were talking to some guys who were shotgunning cans of beer. She sipped a beer, but then didn't remember anything else until she woke up at the hospital. She said she didn't remember kissing anyone or walking away from the house with anyone, and that she did not give her consent to any sort of sexual activity. At his arraignment on February 6, 2015, Brock pleaded not guilty, while the judge, Judge Aaron Persky, issued a 1-year protective order saying that he must stay at least 100 yards away from Emily, give up any firearms he may have, and cannot attempt to intimidate any witnesses. Santa Clara County Deputy District Attorney Alale Kanersi spoke to reporters outside the courthouse after his arraignment.
Rape is always a crime of violence. When we hear the word rape, we often think of physical force. Rape is more often the thievery of the body and dignity of a woman, taken by offenders who believe no one will know and no one is looking. These types of sexual assaults happen on campuses, at parties all across the country. Sadly, they often go unreported, or worse, we're not able to proceed on these cases. Luckily for the victim in this case, there are 2 good Samaritans who were at the right place, at the right time, and more importantly, they did the right thing. And that's the message that needs to be sent to the community. Don't just stand by if you see something inappropriate. If you see something, say something.
By the time Brock went to trial in March 2016, 2 of the 5 charges against him had been dropped. He was now facing charges of assault with intent to commit rape of an intoxicated or unconscious person, sexual penetration of an intoxicated person, and sexual penetration of an unconscious person. In her opening statements, District Attorney Alale Kanersi told the jury that they would need to decide whether Emily consented and whether she was in a state to do so. She played a voicemail recording that Emily had left for her boyfriend at 12:16 a.m. on January 18, 2015. Emily's speech was slow and slurred, and only a few words were recognizable. Kanersi told the jury that Peter Johnson and Carl Arndt, the 2 graduate students, approached Brock while he was on top of Emily and asked him, "What the hell are you doing? She's unconscious." She said those were the words of a man who, when he saw Emily, very quickly realized that she wasn't a willing participant. She said there were many men who came across Emily that night whose instincts were to help her and not try to rape or sexually assault her. But one man took advantage of her that night. She pointed to the defense table and said, "His name is Brock Turner." She told them they will hear testimony that as he was confronted by Peter and Carl, Brock's instinct was to get up and run away, leaving Emily half naked on the ground. She asked the jury to hold him accountable for taking advantage of Emily when she was helpless and incapable of giving consent. In his opening statements, Brock's attorney, Michael Armstrong, said that the only person who can testify about what truly happened between Emily and Brock is Brock. He said that Brock will be testifying and that he will tell them everything that happened from the very beginning of the evening through to being found on the ground with Emily. He said Brock will testify to how much he drank, everything that happened with Emily while at the fraternity house, and what happened when they left together. He said Brock will answer all of their questions. He told the jury that nearly every witness they will hear from had previously testified to drinking that night, and so he asked the jury to take that into account. Deputy Jeff Taylor testified for the state and recounted how Emily was unconscious and unresponsive when he found her. He recalled trying to ask her if she was okay, and how he kept saying it louder and louder until he was basically yelling at her to try to elicit a response, but nothing. He said she remained that way for hours. Photos of Emily throughout the night from when she was found on were shown to the jury. One photo depicted her lying on her side on the ground, surrounded by paramedics. Another of her being put onto a backboard before being taken in an ambulance. And yet another of her in a hospital bed, her hair covered in pine needles. Deputy Taylor said that in all the photos, despite numerous attempts to get her to wake up, she remained unresponsive. When Emily finally awoke at the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, it was about 4:15 a.m. Deputy Taylor told her that there was a chance that she may have been sexually assaulted. The two graduate students who chased after Brock that night, Peter Johnson and Carl Arndt, also testified. Peter said that Brock tried to run away as fast as he could, and that after they stopped him, he saw that Brock was smiling. He said he asked him, "Why are you smiling? Stop smiling." He then said, "What are you doing? She's unconscious." A friend of Emily's sister, who was at the party with them that night, told the jury that she saw a man try to kiss Emily's sister out of the blue while they were standing in a group talking. She said Emily's sister thought it was weird and moved her head away. That man, she said, was Brock Turner. She said that she and Emily's sister left the party a little after 12 a.m. to take another friend home, and when they came back, Emily was nowhere to be found. Emily's boyfriend told the court that he exchanged text messages and phone calls with Emily that night, and that he had never heard her that intoxicated before. Christine Setterlund, a sexual assault response team nurse, said she found abrasions and redness on several areas of Emily's body, on her buttocks, on the right side of her neck, below her right clavicle, and at the base of her neck and upper back. The redness, she said, is similar to redness that appears on someone's skin after they have been slapped. She said there was also significant trauma, including penetrating trauma. However, she couldn't say what caused it. Setterlund also examined Brock. She collected swabs from his saliva, palms of his hands, fingers, and nails, and handed them over to the crime lab. She said Brock also had abrasions and redness in several parts of his body, and that he had vegetation or soil on his back, hands, ankles, and forearms. We'll get into more testimony, including testimony from both Emily and Brock, after this quick break from today's sponsors. When Emily Doe got up to the stand, she told the court that on the day of the assault, she went hiking with her younger sister and friend. They then ate dinner and went home, where she made the decision to join her sister and her sister's friends at a fraternity party on the Stanford campus. She said she had been drinking in the earlier part of the night and felt buzzed and silly. At the party, she drank more and remembered singing songs and trying to embarrass her sister. But then she began to feel very out of it and wasn't articulating much. She said she could remember being outside on the back patio of the house with her sister, sister's friend, and 3 guys. One of the guys gave her a beer, but she said she didn't drink much of it. She had no memory of meeting Brock. The next thing she remembers is waking up at the hospital and laying on a gurney in a hallway. She was wearing hospital pants, but her dress was pushed up to her waist, and there was dried blood on her hand. She said she thought that maybe she had fallen down or had gotten too drunk and was in trouble at a university administration building. She didn't know where she was, what time it was, or why she was there. When Deputy Taylor told her that there was reason to believe that she had been sexually assaulted, she said she thought they had the wrong person and that they were confused. But when she went to the bathroom and went to pull down her underwear, only to find that they were missing, she realized something was wrong. On cross-examination, Brock's attorney asked her about her drinking that night and about the partying she did back when she was in college. She said she did a decent amount, but wouldn't consider herself a party animal. He asked her about blacking out, and she said she had experienced blackouts before. On redirect, Emily said her tolerance had lowered since being out of college, that she was working full-time and not going out as much. She said that when she had blacked out before, while in college, she had never blacked out to the point where she was half naked outside. She said her friends would tell her the next day that she had been slurring her words, and so they had taken her home. She told the court that she and her boyfriend were in an exclusive relationship. A firefighter and paramedic who responded to the scene echoed earlier testimony about Emily being unconscious that night. He said he made numerous attempts to wake her, but the only time she responded was when he pinched her fingernails. Her eyes opened briefly, but then shut again. He said he conducted what's called the Glasgow Coma Scale on her, which is typically used to assess patients with brain trauma, but he said it can also be used on people who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol. A score of 15 would be considered normal, but Emily scored an 11. He said any score under 15 is considered altered. Alice King with the Santa Clara County Crime Lab's toxicology unit testified about Emily's blood alcohol content. She said when Emily's blood was drawn at about 7 a.m. at the hospital, her blood alcohol content was 0.127 or 0.129. But she estimated that Emily's blood alcohol content at the time of the assault would have been 0.241 or 0.249. And she said those numbers could actually have been even higher since Emily had been given an IV that diluted her blood. She said that with that amount of alcohol in her system, symptoms Emily may have experienced could include loss of large muscle coordination, slurred speech, the inability to walk or stand, sleepiness, and total confusion. But symptoms can vary from person to person. Brock's blood was drawn at about 3:15 a.m., and his blood alcohol content was 0.13. King estimated that around the time of the assault, it could have been around 0.171. A forensic biologist testified that there was no semen found on Emily nor on her underwear, but that Emily's DNA was found on Brock's right and left fingernails and right finger shaft. All were brown-red stained, which indicated the possible presence of blood. Emily's private areas also tested positive for blood. Mike Kim, a Stanford University police detective, testified that he interviewed Brock on January 18th. That interview was played for the jury. Brock told deputies that he arrived at the Kappa Alpha fraternity at about 11 p.m. that night. He said that throughout the night, he kissed a few girls, drank about 7 beers, and took a couple swigs of Fireball whiskey. Then later, he went to the back of the house and met Emily, who was drinking beer with another girl. He said they kissed for a while and then walked away from the house. They ended up on the ground, he couldn't recall how, and he removed her underwear and digitally penetrated her while they kissed for about 5 minutes. Brock said Emily was responsive and that everything that happened was consensual. He said, like literally, my intentions were not to try to rape a girl without her consent. I can't believe I'm charged with rape. He said he was pretty buzzed and that his memory was fuzzy on some stuff, but clear on others. As for what happened with the 2 graduate students, he said he didn't think he ran away from them. He said he started feeling nauseous, and so he stood up to leave when he was suddenly tackled by a group of guys. He said he had a good time with Emily and that she seemed to enjoy his company. When it was time for the defense to present their case, their purpose was seemingly to present Brock's side of the story and to show that Emily could have consented. They called Kim Fromm to the stand, a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Texas, Austin. Fromm's specialty is studying the effects of alcohol on human memory and behavior, especially in college students. She researched alcohol-induced blackouts, which she called a period of amnesia, but said the person is still fully conscious and able to do everything from walking and talking to having sex and making voluntary decisions. Armstrong asked, if a person were in a blackout, that person would be able to engage in voluntary activities, including sexual activity? And Fromm said that was correct. Fromm said that Emily was likely in a blackout state at the time of the alleged assault, but said there was no scientific way to know. She said research shows that people typically black out when their blood alcohol content reaches 0.20 or higher, and they actually pass out at 0.30 or higher. Risk factors can include having a history of blackouts, being a female, and the kind of alcohol, as well as the rate at which a person is drinking. On cross-examination, Canursi pointed out that in the majority of cases Fromm has testified in, she has testified for the defense. She then read off some emails between Fromm and Armstrong from before the trial. On January 19, 2016, Fromm referenced another case she had just testified in, where the defendant was accused of sexual assault and kidnapping. The jury had just come back with a not guilty verdict, and Fromm wrote, quote, "Let's hope for a comparable outcome for your clients." A few days later, Fromm wrote to Armstrong again and referenced another huge acquittal, this one where the jury acquitted a man who had confessed to police. Canursi asked her if her opinion was unbiased or if it was influenced by the defense in this case. "I'm here as an educator," Fromm responded. After Fromm's testimony, Brock Turner then took the stand. Brock told the court that Emily Doe verbally consented to their sexual activity and said he never had any intentions of raping her. In fact, he said that she was awake and responsive, and that the entire time he was with her, if she had ever been unconscious, he would have gone for help. Brock testified that Emily didn't seem too intoxicated to understand what was going on. He walked the jury through what he said happened that night. He said he saw Emily dancing by herself, and so he told her that he liked her dancing. He said she laughed and said thanks. He then asked her if she wanted to dance with him, and she said sure. They danced for about 10 minutes, and then they started kissing. He asked if she wanted to go to his dorm with him, and she said sure. On their way there, he said they tripped and fell on the ground. Brock admitted that he did take off Emily's underwear and moved her dress and bra so he could touch her, but that she consented when he asked if she wanted him to finger her. So he did, and after about a minute, he said he thought that she had an orgasm. He asked her if she liked it, and she responded, "Uh-huh." Brock said he never took his pants off, but that he and Emily were dry humping when his stomach started to get upset. He told Emily that he thought he was going to throw up, and he said she responded, "Oh, okay." He then got dizzy and stumbled down the street when he realized that there was a man next to him. He said the man said, "What the fuck, you're sick," and then grabbed his shoulder. Brock said he told the man, "I didn't do anything." The man then tried to restrain him, which made him really scared, and so he ran. He told the court that he suffered a broken wrist after he was tackled. On cross-examination, Canursi asked Brock about the differences between the statement he gave to Detective Kim and his testimony today. For example, Brock had told Detective Kim that he didn't think he had tried to run away from the graduate students, but when he testified, he said he did. And he also didn't tell Detective Kim about the interactions he was now saying that he had with Emily that night, or about how they danced for 10 minutes, or how they fell and ended up on the ground. She also brought up the fact that he never mentioned his broken wrist to Detective Kim. Brock said that he had just been charged with such a heinous crime that he never thought he'd be charged with, and that he couldn't think clearly. Canursi also asked about Peter's testimony when he said that Brock was smiling when he approached him. Brock said that he was just laughing at the situation and how ridiculous it was. Brock's defense team then called 3 character witnesses: Brock's swim teammate, his swim coach, and his girlfriend from high school, who all testified that Brock would never do what he was charged with. His high school girlfriend said that although they're no longer dating, they're still close, and that he has great moral character. She said he never pressured her into having any sexual activity with him. When cross-examining these witnesses, Canursi asked if they had ever drank with Brock or attended any parties with him. All of them said no. In her closing arguments, Canursi acknowledged that Brock didn't look like a typical rapist. She said, quote, "But the fact of the matter is, despite the fact that he comes from a good family, despite the fact that he went to an elite school, despite the fact that he was a star swimmer, he is the typical, quintessential face of campus sexual assault." In his closing arguments, Armstrong told the jury that Emily should have known better, that she's had more experience with college parties and blacking out. He said that although she may not have intended for it to happen, that doesn't mean she wasn't aware, conscious, thinking clearly, and taking voluntary actions. The jury of 4 women and 8 men deliberated for 2 days before finding Brock guilty of all 3 counts. But although Brock was found guilty by a jury of his peers, it's what would happen next that would capture headlines all over the country. More on that after this quick break from today's sponsors. Professor Dauber wasn't expecting the guilty verdict.
When I heard the guilty verdict, I was shocked. The reporter who was covering it texted me for comment, and I was blown away. I just did not have the expectation that the jury would find him guilty because he is so privileged and because he is so different from many people who get criminally charged. Our criminal justice system really tends to focus on, people who do not look like Brock Turner and do not come from the kind of privilege that Brock Turner does. And I'm pretty cynical and thought that it was unlikely that he would be found guilty. And I was shocked, but also very happy and relieved. And I was hopeful because I thought, wow, maybe women will win one here, and there will be an appropriate punishment and an appropriate message sent.
Brock's sentencing hearing was in June 2016, and as expected, all sides had differing opinions on how he should be sentenced. First was the probation department. Since Brock was convicted of a felony, he was interviewed by a probation officer, who then came up with a sentencing recommendation for the judge. That interview took place on May 9, 2016. According to the probation officer's report, Brock maintained that he didn't know that Emily was unconscious. He said, quote, "At no time did I see that she was not responding. If at any time I thought she was not responding, I would have stopped immediately." When asked about the impact of his conduct, Brock said, quote, "Having imposed suffering on someone else and causing someone else pain, I can barely live with myself. I can't even get out of bed in the morning. I think about it every second of every day. Her having to go through the justice system because of my actions, it's unforgivable. If I really wanted to get to know her, I should have asked her for her number, rather than asking her to go back to my room. Being drunk, I just couldn't make the best decisions, and neither could she. I stupidly thought it was okay for me to do what everyone around was doing, which was drinking. I was wrong." He then said he was sorry for what he put Emily and her family through during the trial, but he then placed the blame for that on his attorney, saying, quote, "During the trial, I didn't want to victimize her at all. That was just my attorney and his way of approaching the case. I didn't want to degrade her in any way. I regret that." He told the probation officer that he was prepared to accept the decision of the court and would comply with any court orders. He said his plans for the future include speaking out against the college campus drinking culture and the sexual promiscuity that goes along with that. "I want to show people that one night of drinking can ruin a life," he said. Regarding drug and alcohol abuse, Brock said he drank alcohol in college, but said he never used any illicit substances and had not consumed any alcohol since the date of the offense. The probation officer noted in the report that Brock has no criminal history, that he expressed sincere remorse and empathy for the victim, and that when the probation officer interviewed the victim, quote, her focus and concern was treatment rather than incarceration. The probation department then officially recommended a moderate county jail sentence, formal probation for 3 years, and completion of an approved sex offender management program. The prosecution, in their sentencing memo, referenced the probation department's recommendation and wrote, quote, the people respectfully disagree with the probation department's assessment and recommendation in this case. They wrote that the probation department didn't take into consideration the seriousness of the case, the fact that Brock was convicted of multiple sex acts, or the fact that he has not demonstrated genuine remorse or accountability for his actions. They wrote that on June 25, 2015, Detective Kim interviewed 2 women who said they had an encounter with Brock the weekend before the sexual assault on Emily. They went to a fraternity party at the same Kappa Alpha fraternity house and started dancing on a table. They said Brock followed them onto the table and started being really flirtatious with one of the women. She said he put his hat on her, which she then took off. He then started to dance behind her and tried to turn her around to face him. She felt uncomfortable and tried to turn her body away so that he would not be directly behind her. He then became really touchy and put his hands on her waist, on her stomach, and even on her upper thighs. She felt exceedingly uncomfortable and got down off the table. She said he creeped her out because of his persistence. The memo then said that Brock had been arrested before, less than 2 months prior to the assault. Brock and a group of males were caught walking around campus drinking. Brock ran from the police but was eventually identified. He admitted to underage drinking and to evading the police. The memo also refuted Brock's assertion to the probation department, in which he said that he had never used any illicit substances. They pointed to text messages and photos found on Brock's phone. The text messages referenced drug use, both while at Stanford and while he was in high school, and one of the photos included one of Brock smoking from a pipe. And then there was a curious message found within an app called GroupMe on Brock's phone. It was from the night of the assault, and it was from one of Brock's friends. It read, quote, whose tits are those? But by the time detectives got a search warrant for the phone, the messages had been deleted. Detectives learned that when there's a third-party app, images are not stored on the phone and can be deleted by any member of the messaging group. The memo also stated that on the night in question, Brock was on the prowl and attempted to hook up with women he didn't know and who were clearly not interested in his sexual advances, including Emily's sister. And while he was assaulting Emily, they wrote that he would have completed the penile penetration of her had he not been interrupted by the 2 graduate students. Quote, even though the probation department does not see this as a more serious case, Emily and her family do. And equally important, the students on Stanford's campus do not take the case lightly. They asked for the judge to sentence him to 6 years in state prison. Finally, in the defense's sentencing memo, Brock's attorney wrote that no one can pinpoint exactly when the victim went from being conscious to unconscious. And they wrote that Brock was a good young man from a good family with a record of real accomplishments who made bad choices during his time at Stanford. They called for the judge to give Brock a much more lenient sentence than what the prosecution was asking, and even than what the probation department recommended. They asked for Brock to be placed on probation for 3 to 5 years. In a letter to the judge, Emily Doe wrote that she disagreed with the lenient sentence recommendations, saying that it would be a soft timeout, a mockery of the seriousness of his assaults, and of the consequences of the pain that I have been forced to endure. Brock's father also wrote a letter, saying that probation is the best answer, and that the verdicts have broken and shattered Brock and their family in so many ways. Quote, his life will never be the one that he dreamed about and worked so hard to achieve. That is a steep price to pay for 20 minutes of action out of his 20-plus years of life. At Brock's sentencing, Emily Doe read her victim impact statement out loud to the court, part of which I referenced at the beginning of this episode. She directed it right to Brock and started by saying, "You don't know me, but you've been inside me, and that's why we're here today." In excruciating detail, Emily recounted what she remembered from that night. It was a quiet Saturday night at home. My dad made some dinner, and I sat at the table with my younger sister who was visiting for the weekend. I was working full-time, and it was approaching my bedtime. I planned to stay at home by myself, watch some TV and read, while she went to a party with her friends. Then, I decided it was my only night with her. I had nothing better to do, so why not? There's a dumb party 10 minutes from my house. I would go, dance weird like a fool, and embarrass my younger sister. On the way there, I joked that undergrad guys would have braces. My sister teased me for wearing a beige cardigan to a frat party like a librarian. I called myself Big Mama because I knew I'd be the oldest one there. I made silly faces, let my guard down, and drank liquor too fast, not factoring in that my tolerance had significantly lowered since college. Emily then recounted what happened when she woke up. The next thing I remember, I was in a gurney in a hallway. I had dried blood and bandages on the backs of my hands and elbow. I thought maybe I had fallen and was in an admin office on campus. I was very calm and wondering where my sister was. A deputy explained that I had been assaulted. Emily then recalled the terror of learning what had exactly happened to her. One day I was at work, scrolling through the news on my phone, and came across an article. In it, I read and learned for the first time about how I was found unconscious, with my hair disheveled, long necklace wrapped around my neck, bra pulled out of my dress pulled off my shoulders and pulled up above my waist, that I was butt naked all the way down to my boots, legs spread apart, and had been penetrated by a foreign object, by someone I did not recognize. This was how I learned what happened to me, sitting at my desk reading the news at work. I learned what happened to me the same time everyone else in the world learned what happened to me. That's when the pine needles in my hair made sense. They didn't fall from a tree. He had taken off my underwear. His fingers had been inside of me. I don't even know this person. I still don't know this person. When I read about me like this, I said, this can't be me. She recounted what it was like to have to tell her parents what had happened to her. The night the news came out, I sat my parents down and told them that I had been assaulted, to not look at the news because it's upsetting. Just know that I'm okay. I'm right here and I'm okay. But halfway through telling them, my mom had to hold me because I could no longer stand up. I was not okay. Emily went through the inconsistencies of Brock's statements, from what he initially said happened to what he was then saying at trial, and how she had predicted that. So 1 year later, as predicted, a new dialogue emerged. Brock had a strange new story, almost sounded like a poorly written young adult novel with kissing and dancing and hand-holding and lovingly tumbling onto the ground. And most importantly, in this new story, there was suddenly consent. 1 year after the incident, he remembered, oh yeah, by the way, she actually said yes to everything, so... She then addressed what Brock said to the probation officer after he had been sentenced. You said, I want to show people that one night of drinking can ruin a life. Ruin a life, one life, yours. You forgot about mine. Let me rephrase for you. I want to show people that one night of drinking can ruin 2 lives, you and me. You are the cause. I am the effect. When it came time to sentence him, Judge Persky said he considered both aggravating and mitigating factors. The aggravating factor was the fact that the victim was particularly vulnerable. The mitigating factors included the lack of a criminal record, the fact that Brock was legally intoxicated, and the character evidence, both from trial and after. Saying that a prison sentence would have, quote, a severe impact on him, Judge Persky sentenced Brock to 6 months in county jail with credit for time served, meaning that he would only spend about 3 months there. Brock would also have to register as a sex offender and would spend 3 years on probation. The reaction to the sentencing spread like wildfire, and the majority of it wasn't favorable towards Judge Persky. District Attorney Jeff Rosen told reporters afterwards that the punishment does not fit the crime and that the sentence doesn't factor in the seriousness of the assault or the victim's ongoing trauma. An opinion piece in the San Francisco Chronicle was entitled "Stanford Rape Case, a Lost Ounce of Justice." And the New York Daily News ran an article whose headline read, "Former Stanford swimmer convicted of rape gets slap on the wrist." And even one of the jurors weighed in. In a letter sent to the Palo Alto Weekly, the juror wrote that they were, quote, shocked and appalled when they heard about the minimal sentence Brock Turner would have to serve for his crime. They wrote, quote, "Justice has not been served in this case. The jury's verdict of guilt on all 3 felony counts of sexual assault was completely disregarded in an effort to spare the perpetrator a hardship. What message does this send to Emily Doe, and indeed all victims of sexual assault and rape, especially those on college campuses? Your concern was for the impact on the assailant. I vehemently disagree. Our concern should be for the victim." Shortly after the sentencing, Emily's victim impact statement that she read out loud in court was published on BuzzFeed. And the vice president, Joe Biden, wrote an open letter to her, saying that her words, quote, "are forever seared on my soul, words that should be required reading for men and women of all ages." Aside from the sympathy and empathy many people felt towards Emily Doe, there were other emotions running rampant too. Anger and disbelief towards Judge Persky for the lenient sentencing. And before long, a recall effort, led by Professor Michelle Dauber, had begun. She had been at the sentencing hearing and said she couldn't believe it when Judge Persky said that Brock was more law-abiding than other law-abiding people, even though he had been arrested a couple months prior for underage drinking and running from the police, and even though he had lied to the court about his prior drug and alcohol use.
I thought that was revelatory because it showed, sort of how unconscious bias works in the legal system. That the judge, sort of looked out and saw this white, privileged, upper-class young man, and instead of seeing the convicted sex offender who had done this, really terrible crime in front of him, he saw him refracted through the lens of privilege, someone like himself from a similar class background with nice parents who, was an athlete like he was. He saw him as an innocent person rather than a guilty person. He saw him as someone who had made a mistake rather than someone who had committed 3 felonies.
Not only that, but Professor Dauber said that there was a moment in court when Judge Persky had the perfect opportunity to compromise between the two sides, but he didn't.
The other revelatory moment was when the district attorney said, after the judge gave his indicated sentence, of 6 months, she stood up and, had an opportunity to respond to that and said, everyone knows that 6 months is only 3 months because of state law. And the people, don't agree, think this is a prison case. But, we recognize that Your Honor does not want to send Mr. Turner to prison. We would request that he gets a year and then will serve 6 actual months. It's still inadequate. It's still not sending the right message. It's still hopelessly short of the mark. But at least it would have been better than 3 months. And I thought, surely he will grant this request because the probation recommendation was for a moderate county jail sentence, moderate typically being 6 months to a year. So he's at the very low end of this recommendation with his indicated sentence. So surely this is a compromise position, right? And he said no. And I think that really, together with the other comment that I mentioned to you and some others that I could talk about as well that occurred during that sentencing, made it clear that this was a judge who just didn't get it. He did not take violence against women seriously. He was not willing to understand the seriousness and severity of the harm and of the crime itself and of the risk to women of under-deterring. And the judge, in fact, did not even mention general deterrence in imposing the sentence, even though it's one of the statutory factors that he is supposed to consider when imposing sentence. He just never mentioned it. It was all about Mr. Turner. What would be the impact on Mr. Turner, with no evident thought to the impact on the 43% of Stanford women year in and year out who experience these kinds of harms.
After the sentencing hearing, Professor Dauber started receiving phone calls from female lawyers in the area, telling her to look into Judge Persky's sentencing history in other cases. So she and a team of law students went to the courthouse and obtained his docket. They found other cases that Professor Dauber said were problematic, involving sexual violence, domestic violence, and even child pornography. In one of the cases, in February 2015, Ikaika Gunderson, another college athlete with family ties to Stanford, was accused of beating his former girlfriend, of punching her in the face, strangling her, and pushing her out of a car. Gunderson confessed to police and pleaded no contest to felony domestic violence. He was facing up to 4 years in state prison, but instead, Judge Persky allowed him to go to Hawaii, where he had been accepted at the university to go play football. Judge Persky said he would reduce the charge to a misdemeanor if Gunderson completed a domestic violence course and attended AA meetings. But Gunderson did none of those things, and in fact dropped out of college, left Hawaii, and later that year was rearrested in Washington on another domestic violence charge. In another case, the defendant was convicted of felony child pornography, and Judge Persky sentenced him to 4 days in jail.
It was bad, too. It wasn't like an 18-year-old with his picture of his 16-year-old girlfriend, which is bad also, but this wasn't that. This was a 45-year-old, father of 2 young daughters who had pictures of, 5-year-olds and one picture of an infant. And, it was just really, really upsetting. Like, my research assistant found this case, and she called me and she said, I can never unsee the things that I'm reading in this file. Like, it was bad.
They also learned that back in 2011, when Judge Persky was handling civil cases, he was the judge in another high-profile sexual assault case at a college in the area, known as the De Anza gang rape case. 8 members of the De Anza College baseball team were being sued by a 17-year-old female victim who said she was gang raped while she was unconscious. Like in Brock's case, there were eyewitnesses who stopped the assault and rescued her.
Her lawyers went on television after the Turner sentence and denounced Judge Persky as biased and said publicly that they felt that he had been biased in favor of the baseball players in the De Anza case, and that he had allowed them to enter into evidence Facebook photos of the victim dressed in a skimpy outfit and drinking alcohol that were taken around a year after the assault in order supposedly to prove that she didn't have PTSD from being gang raped. And obviously that would be an extremely prejudicial piece of evidence, and the probative value would be almost nothing. So, because, you can't prove a mental state or a mental condition with a photo. The fact that you're smiling in this photo does not mean that you don't have PTSD. You need a doctor for that. So that's a very, prejudicial determination by that judge. And at the same time, there was a second victim who alleged that she had been assaulted in the same place by some of the same defendants in a very similar manner, which was quite predatory, having a certain kind of Jell-O shot for the girls and a different kind for the boys and so forth, about a month previous. And he barred her testimony, saying that knowing about Jane Doe number 2 would be too prejudicial to the defendants.
After learning about all of these prior cases, Professor Dauber decided to start a recall campaign, not just to get Judge Persky off the bench, but to at least leave it up to the voters to decide if this was someone they wanted in such a position. But their efforts weren't without resistance, namely from the legal community. The Santa Clara County Bar Association came out with a statement saying that, quote, judges have a duty to apply the law to the facts and evidence before them, regardless of public opinion or political pressure. The statement went on to say, if judges had to fear direct personal repercussions as a result of their decisions in individual cases, the rule of law would suffer. And the district attorney who had spoken out about Judge Persky's sentence said that although he strongly disagreed with the sentencing, he didn't believe that he should be removed from his judgeship. In December 2016, Judge Persky was cleared of judicial misconduct by the Commission on Judicial Performance. But none of this was a deterrent for Professor Dauber. She said in their decision, the Commission got some of the facts of the case wrong, and that the Commission is actually under multiple investigations for their failure to ever hold judges accountable. And aside from that, their decision wasn't relevant to what the recall campaign was trying to achieve.
The Commission on Judicial Performance doesn't deal with the question that we were raising, which is, are these decisions that he is making on the subject of sexual violence unreasonably biased toward, perpetrators and unreasonably insensitive to the issue of sexual violence and sexual assault? I mean, that's not a question that the Commission on Judicial Performance answers. And that is the question that we were putting before the voters.
So in June 2018, the decision did go to the voters. And the voters agreed with the recall campaign, and so Judge Persky was recalled.
I was really happy, and I think there was probably a picture on my Twitter feed still at the top of me looking pretty happy with the result. I was anxious. We didn't really know. We had polling that suggested that we would do well, but we didn't really know. And the other side had become, pretty aggressive. Judge Persky's campaign had engaged in a lot of really, really terrible victim blaming toward the end of the campaign, and had gone after Emily Doe and had been defending Brock Turner really openly. I mean, we'd been hearing it all throughout the campaign, but it became very open at the end. And I did not really have a clear sense of how that would play out. I was extremely relieved that the voters in this county rejected those arguments resoundingly. So, this is something that all of us on the team, and this was a team, we had 1,000 active involved volunteers and a leadership team that, had, 6 or 7 people on it. And we had all been, putting 24 hours a day into this for 2 years. So it was a very happy day for us.
As for Brock Turner, he was released from county jail after serving just 3 months, and local news cameras caught up with him as he registered for the first time as a sex offender. He appealed his conviction, and in his appeal, his attorney, Eric Mothop, said that Brock didn't get a fair trial. He said there was insufficient evidence and that several character witnesses had been excluded. They argued that Brock shouldn't have been convicted of intending to commit rape because his pants were still on, and because he had merely sought, quote, outer course with the victim. Outer course, they explained, was defined as sexual activity other than vaginal sex. In August 2018, his appeal was denied. And something else happened as a result of this case. In January 2017, new laws went into effect in California. The new legislation says that judges can no longer sentence offenders convicted of sexual assault to probation if the victim was unconscious or intoxicated. It also expands the definition of rape to include non-consensual sexual assaults. And that's all for today's episode. I want to thank Professor Michelle Dauber for speaking with me about this case. I spoke with Professor Dauber at length about her recall campaign, and there was frankly just too much information to fit into just this episode. So I've decided to release a court junkie brief on the subject of recalling the judge. In the brief, I'll have more with Professor Dauber on how exactly the recall process works, more about Judge Persky's prior sentences, what she says to the criticisms that Judge Persky didn't break the law with his lenient sentences, what she was up against in the legal community, what's next for the campaign, and even more about death threats she received. Death threats that caused parts of the Stanford campus to be evacuated. Here's a snippet from the brief.
one of the many dozens or hundreds of, angry, hateful, semi-threatening things that I received, was a threatening letter that had glitter in it. So when you open it, it sprays glitter everywhere. And it was from some company called Ship Your Enemies Glitter or something. And anyway, so I thought that was kind of creative, and I tweeted it. And then about shortly thereafter, maybe a couple weeks later, I received a card that had the same words inside, but also had white powder in it. And that, of course, is the thing you're referring to, and it caused the shutdown of the university.
So be on the lookout for that in the next coming weeks. And in the meantime, for more info on what's next for Professor Dauber and her campaign to make violence against women a voting issue, you can visit enoughisenoughvoter.org. It's a brand new website that should be up either this week or next, so be on the lookout for that too. You can also follow Professor Dauber on Twitter at MLDAUBER and Enough Voter. I'll include the links in the show notes. I'd also love to hear what your thoughts are on this case. What are your thoughts on Brock's sentencing? Do you agree with the recall campaign and their efforts in letting the voters decide? Let me know by joining my Facebook discussion group at courtjunkie.com/Facebook, by tweeting me at courtjunkiepod, or by emailing me at podcast@courtjunkie.com. As always, if you want to hear these episodes early and ad-free, you can go to courtjunkie.com/support and donate as little as $1 a month. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.